A single breath. That's all it took for her dream to shatter. Under the blinding lights of America's Talent Challenge, a young singer collapses before millions, her voice silenced, her body trembling. The crowd freezes. The judges panic. But one man in the front row stands up. What he does next will silence the entire world. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The studio was alive with light and energy. Rows of audience members leaned forward in their seats, their faces glowing under the shimmer of the stage. The theme music of America's Talent Challenge echoed through the speakers, signaling another hopeful performer about to chase a dream. Cameras swept across the room, capturing smiles, glittering signs, and the kind of nervous excitement that fills the air before something unforgettable happens. At the center of it all stood Emma Carter, 24 years old. A simple girl from rural Kansas who had spent her life singing in church halls, school gyms, and wedding receptions. Now, for the first time, she faced the biggest audience she had ever seen. Her hands trembled as she gripped the microphone. Her heart thudded so loudly that she could barely hear the applause. "Take a deep breath," whispered the stage manager from the wings. Emma nodded, though her throat felt tight. The judges sat behind their desks, 3 of them, each with a different kind of gaze. The stern one scribbled notes. The warm one smiled kindly. The third leaned back, waiting to be impressed. A single spotlight bathed her in white. Her sequined dress shimmered like it belonged to someone else. She blinked toward the crowd, searching for one familiar face, but everyone blurred together. The host's voice faded into the distance. The only thing she could hear now was the pounding of her pulse. Emma thought about her mother. She remembered the nights on their front porch when they'd sing together under the Kansas stars. Her mom had always said, "If you ever get scared on stage, just look up. The sky's still there, even if you can't see it." But under these lights, there was no sky, only the blinding glare of expectation. Her song began to play. The first note floated through the air, soft and pure. Emma opened her mouth, and the words came out shaky but hopeful. She took another breath and tried to steady herself. A few seconds later, her voice cracked. The sound of it echoed painfully in the vast room. A few audience members shifted uncomfortably. Someone whispered. The judges exchanged quick looks. The warmth drained from Emma's face. Her knees trembled harder. She tried again, pushing through the panic. "When you walk through a storm," she began. But her vision wavered. The lights seemed to swirl around her. The edges of the stage began to fade. A buzzing filled her ears. Her chest tightened. For a moment, she thought she could still finish, that if she just reached the next line, everything would be fine. But then her breath hitched, her microphone slipped from her fingers, and the music stopped. The next second stretched into eternity. Emma swayed once, then collapsed onto the stage floor, the sound of her fall cutting through the silence like thunder. The crowd gasped. Someone screamed. A cameraman froze mid-shot. On the judges' panel, papers flew as one of them stood up in shock. The host rushed forward, shouting for medical staff. And then, from the front row, a calm figure rose before anyone else moved. Keanu Reeves had been sitting quietly all night, wearing a simple black blazer and jeans, trying to blend in. He had come only to support a friend in the production crew. But in that moment, instinct overtook anonymity. He pushed past the security barrier without hesitation, his eyes locked on the fallen contestant. "Give her space." His voice rang out, not loud, but commanding enough to still the chaos. The crowd fell silent. He knelt beside Emma, steady and sure, as the blinding lights softened above him. The camera, still rolling, caught every detail, his hand brushing hair gently from her face, his expression focused yet kind. The audience watched in absolute stillness. unaware that what they were witnessing would soon echo across the world. Emma's breathing was shallow, her face pale under the glare of the stage lights. Keanu gently tilted her head to the side, checking her airway, then placed a steady hand on her shoulder. The crowd held its breath. For the first time that night, the room filled not with music or applause, but with a heavy, frightened silence. The stage crew hurried forward, unsure whether to help or stay back. One of them hesitated, looking to Keanu for direction. He nodded calmly. "Get some water. Call the medic," he said, his voice low but firm. Even in crisis, there was something grounding in his tone. The man dashed off, obeying without question. Emma's eyes fluttered open for a brief moment, disoriented. She tried to sit up, but Keanu placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Don't rush," he said softly. "You're safe. Just stay still." His voice carried across the silent room like a whisper of reassurance. The judges stood frozen behind their desks, unsure what to do. One of them, the stern-faced producer known for harsh critiques, cleared his throat and started to speak. But the look on Keanu's face stopped him cold. There was no anger, just a quiet warning in his eyes. Not now. In the front row, a young boy who had been cheering earlier tugged his mother's sleeve. "Is she gonna be okay?" he whispered. The mother nodded weakly, watching as the medics finally reached the stage. They crouched beside Keanu, who moved slightly to make room but stayed close, as though his presence itself were a shield. The audience watched. Every move, their hearts pounding in unison. Some held their hands over their mouths. Others whispered prayers under their breath. The host, voice trembling, spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. We're giving our contestant the care she needs." One of the medics asked Keanu, "Do you know her?" He shook his head. "No, but I know she needs kindness more than noise right now." That simple answer was somehow more profound than any performance that night. The words seemed to ripple through the crowd. Even the cameras kept rolling, zooming in on the quiet humanity of the moment. Keanu wasn't trying to be seen. He was simply there. As the medic checked Emma's pulse, Keanu kept holding her hand lightly, speaking in a calm rhythm. "You're okay. Breathe. Don't worry about the show. You did great just by walking up here." Emma's breathing began to slow, her eyes flickering open again. Her lips trembled. "I'm sorry," she whispered, faintly. Keanu leaned closer, shaking his head. "No, don't apologize. Everyone's scared sometimes. What matters is you tried." A murmur of emotion spread through the audience. Some people wiped away tears. Others began to clap quietly, hesitant at first, then building into soft, supportive applause. The lights dimmed slightly, as if the entire studio had decided to match the tone of his voice. Section 1. The Collapse, Part 3, of 3 to 100 words. As the medics lifted Emma onto a stretcher, Keanu stood, his expression unreadable, yet deeply human. Before leaving the stage, he turned to the silent audience and said calmly, "We shouldn't judge anyone based on a moment of fear." The words lingered in the air, more powerful than any performance that night. Cameras captured the image of him standing under the fading spotlight, hands folded, eyes steady. The crowd rose in quiet respect. Somewhere backstage, Emma whispered through tears, "He saved me." And from that moment, a simple act of compassion began to echo far beyond the studio walls. The sound of sirens echoed faintly from the hallway as the studio doors opened. Paramedics rushed toward the stage, pushing a stretcher and carrying small medical kits. Their movements were swift, but the chaos around them was not. Audience members whispered in shock, phones half raised before the staff sternly motioned for them to stop recording. The show that was supposed to bring joy had turned into something far more human, something raw and real. Keanu stayed crouched beside Emma, shielding her from the intensity of the overhead lights. He gently supported her head with a folded jacket one of the crew members handed him. Her breathing was unsteady, but there was color returning to her cheeks. He glanced toward the medics, calm and focused. "She's coming around," he said quietly. The host stood frozen with a microphone still in hand, trying to hold himself together. "Seated," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We're taking care of Emma." But even he could feel the energy shift. This wasn't just a television moment anymore. It was real life unfolding before millions of eyes. From the control room above, the producer's voice crackled through a headset. "Cut to commercial. Now." But the technical director hesitated. "Wait. People are watching this. Let it roll." The crew exchanged uncertain looks. No one wanted to exploit the moment, but something about it felt important, almost sacred. It wasn't entertainment anymore. It was truth. Keanu leaned closer to Emma, speaking in a tone only she could hear. "You're okay," he said softly. "Just breathe in slowly. That's it. You're safe." His presence was like an anchor in a storm. Even as cameras zoomed in, his focus never wavered from her. Emma's fingers twitched. Her eyes flickered open for a second, unfocused, then closed again. Keanu gave a reassuring nod to the medic kneeling beside him. "She's conscious," the medic confirmed, checking her pulse. "Fainting from stress, maybe dehydration." The host wiped sweat from his forehead, whispering into his earpiece. "We can't end the show like this," he muttered. From the front of the audience, a child's small voice broke the silence. "Is she gonna be okay?" It was barely audible, but it cut through the tension like sunlight through fog. Keanu glanced up, found the boy in the third row, and gave a slow, steady nod. "She's going to be fine," he said gently. The boy smiled, and a few people in the audience started clapping softly, hesitantly, unsure if it was the right thing to do. Soon others followed, until the entire studio filled with the sound of quiet, comforting applause. It wasn't for a performance. It was for humanity. Keanu stayed kneeling as the medics lifted Emma carefully onto the stretcher. The camera lights dimmed a little, casting softer shadows. She stirred again, whispering something too faint for the microphones to catch. Keanu leaned closer and nodded. Whatever she said, it was enough to make him smile faintly, a rare, humble smile that seemed to ease the air in the room. The medics began guiding Emma's stretcher toward the backstage area, moving cautiously under the glare of studio lights. The host stepped aside, giving them room. The audience watched in silence, not daring to speak. It felt like every heart in that room was beating in rhythm with hers, waiting for her to open her eyes again. Keanu stood slowly, his movements deliberate. His calm composure contrasted sharply with the tension that still hung in the air. The cameras followed him as he adjusted the microphone stand Emma had dropped earlier. He picked up the microphone gently, brushing off the dust from where it had rolled, and placed it back upright. The small gesture carried unexpected weight, as if he were restoring a broken moment with quiet respect. A stage assistant whispered, "We're live. Do we cut?" The producer shook her head, eyes fixed on the monitors. "No," she said. "People need to see this." The decision hung heavy. For once, the network wasn't chasing drama, it was witnessing decency. Keanu turned back toward the audience. His voice was soft, but carried clearly through the silent room. "We shouldn't judge anyone based on a moment of fear." His tone was steady, compassionate, and free of performance. Those simple words rippled through the crowd like a gentle wave. In the control booth, one of the camera operators whispered, "Did he just save the show?" The other replied, "No, he saved its soul." Emma's stretcher disappeared behind the velvet curtains, leaving the stage strangely still. The audience waited for someone to cue the next act, but no one did. Instead, a hush lingered in almost reverent silence that didn't need filling. For the first time in the show's history, the spectacle gave way to sincerity. A member of the production crew approached Keanu hesitantly. "Sir, thank you for stepping in," she said. "Most people would have waited for the medics." Keanu looked at her and shook his head. "You don't wait when someone's scared," he replied simply. "Fear is heavier when you're alone." His words weren't rehearsed. They carried the quiet truth of someone who had seen too many lonely moments in life. The host returned to the center of the stage, voice low and trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "Emma is stable and being taken care of. Let's take a brief pause." But before the show could fade to black, Keanu's eyes met one of the cameras. For a fraction of a second, the lens caught the depth of his expression: sad, sincere, but hopeful. It was the kind of look that told a story all its own. It said that life wasn't about perfect performances, but about how we respond when someone falls. And as the crowd began to applaud softly again, Keanu took one last glance toward the curtain before stepping down from the stage, disappearing quietly into the shadows. Backstage, the medics guided Emma to a quiet area where she could rest. A producer hovered nearby, murmuring updates into a headset. In the control room, the broadcast cut briefly to commercials, but everyone knew the real story had already been told. The footage of Keanu kneeling beside Emma would replay across the world before the night was over. On stage, the tension slowly melted into reflection. Audience members stayed seated, whispering softly to one another. The judges remained silent, exchanging uneasy glances. They were professionals, used to critique and spectacle, but something about what had just happened left them humbled. Keanu lingered for a moment near the microphone. He had returned to its stand. The lights dimmed around him, leaving a faint glow across his calm expression. He didn't look for the cameras, didn't wave or smile. He simply stood there, thoughtful and grounded, as if reminding everyone that compassion was not a performance, it was a choice. The host finally spoke again, voice steady but emotional. "Tonight reminds us all that courage isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up. Thank you, Mr. Reeves." The crowd rose to its feet, not in applause for a celebrity, but in gratitude for a moment of grace that felt real in a world full of pretense. As the applause faded, Keanu gave one last glance toward the curtains where Emma had been taken. Then he walked quietly down the steps, blending into the shadows of the studio. The spotlight dimmed, and the next act never came. For that night, the stage didn't belong to competition or fame. It belonged to kindness. That was the moment everyone watching realized. The greatest act of the evening wasn't sung. It was felt. Backstage, the world was quieter but still heavy with tension. The bright hum of the studio faded into a low murmur behind closed doors. The faint echo of applause from the audience could still be heard, distant and unsure. In a small dressing room tucked behind the main stage, Emma Carter stirred beneath the soft glow of a single lamp. She blinked groggily as her surroundings came into focus. White walls, a makeup mirror, the distant whir of cameras resetting for commercial break. A medic knelt beside her, gently checking her pulse and blood pressure. "You're okay," he said softly. "You just fainted. Looks like dehydration and stress." Emma's eyes filled with tears as the memory came rushing back. The blinding lights, the faces watching her. The moment her knees gave out, she tried to sit up but stopped, clutching the edge of the couch. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "I blew it. I ruined everything." A production assistant tried to comfort her, but she barely heard the words. "I worked so hard for this," she said, shaking her head. "I can't believe I fainted on live television." The medic handed her a bottle of water. "Drink slowly. You need to hydrate." She took a small sip, her trembling hands barely holding the bottle. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes glazed with humiliation. Every part of her wanted to disappear. "They're never going to let me back out there," she murmured, half to herself. I'll be the girl who passed out on TV." At that moment, the door opened quietly. The crew looked up, startled. Keanu Reeves stood in the doorway. He wasn't followed by cameras or handlers, just his quiet presence, calm and steady. His black blazer looked slightly wrinkled now. His hair tousled from the commotion, but his eyes were the same, gentle and focused. Without saying a word, he crossed the room and knelt down beside Emma again, just as he had on stage. The motion was natural, unforced, as if it was the only thing to do. "You didn't fail," he said softly. His voice carried the weight of sincerity that filled the room instantly. "Your body just reminded you to breathe." Emma blinked in disbelief, her tears spilling over. Why are you here?" she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Because I've been there. The world goes quiet, your chest tightens, and everything feels like it's ending. But it's not. It's just fear, asking for kindness." The words struck her deeper than he could have known. The crew members exchanged glances, unsure whether to stay or give them space, but no one moved. For once, everyone simply watched in silence, as a global icon knelt beside a trembling contestant and spoke with the humility of a friend. Emma tried to look away, but her shame burned too deep. "Everyone saw me faint," she whispered. "The whole country probably saw it. I'll never live this down." Keanu sat on the edge of a nearby chair, keeping his tone quiet and steady. "Everyone saw something human," he said. "That's not something to be ashamed of." He reached for a towel from the counter and handed it to her. She dabbed her forehead, still trembling. "You know," he continued softly, "I once froze in front of a live audience too. It wasn't on television, but it felt like the end of the world. My voice caught, my mind blanked, and for a few seconds, I couldn't remember my own lines." He paused, meeting her eyes. "I thought that one mistake would define me, but it didn't. What defined me was what I did next." Emma looked up slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "What did you do?" "I took a deep breath," he said simply, "and I finished the scene." His answer wasn't heroic or exaggerated, it was quiet, like everything about him. And somehow that made it more powerful. Emma felt her chest loosen slightly, the weight of humiliation beginning to lift. The medic smiled faintly from the corner. "Looks like someone found the right medicine," he said under his breath. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a sealed bottle of water, handing it to her. "Drink this," he said gently. "You'll feel better." Emma took it, hands still shaking. Her tears softened into gratitude. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "Don't say anything," he replied. "Just take a breath. You did something most people never do. You showed up, even when it was scary. That takes more courage than you think." For a moment, no one spoke. The room felt still, the noise of the stage muffled behind the walls. The air carried a strange calm, the kind that follows after a storm. Emma's trembling slowed. She looked down at her hands and then back at him. "Why do you care so much?" He smiled gently, his eyes soft. "Because someone once cared that much for me when I needed it," he said. "And I never forgot." The producer standing by the door hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. She'd worked in television for 15 years, but she'd never seen something so real unfold in a backstage room. It wasn't about fame or reputation. It was about one person showing another that failure didn't mean the end. Emma let out a small, shaky laugh. "I must look ridiculous right now," she said, quietly. Keanu shook his head. "You look human. That's what people will remember." Emma's breathing had steadied. The color was returning to her cheeks, though her eyes were still glassy with exhaustion. The medic finished his checks, satisfied she was stable, and quietly left the room. The producer lingered by the door, her phone in hand, not to take a call but to capture what was happening before her. Keanu remained beside Emma, still kneeling, his tone patient and kind. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Sometimes it takes falling in front of everyone to realize that the world won't end when you do." She tried to smile, wiping the corner of 27, her eye. "I don't feel strong," she said. "Strength doesn't always feel like strength," he answered. "It feels like surviving the moment you thought you couldn't." The words sank in slowly. She took another sip of water, feeling her hands stop trembling. Her shoulders, which had been rigid with tension, began to relax. For the first time since stepping on stage, she felt grounded again. Keanu stood and offered her his hand. She hesitated, then took it. He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she found her balance. Her knees still felt weak, but his calm presence steadied her like a lighthouse in fog. A quiet click broke the silence. The producer, overcome by the tenderness of the scene, had snapped a single photo, Keanu holding Emma's hand, her faint smile just beginning to return. The flash was barely noticeable, but the image it captured would soon travel across the internet, symbolizing grace, humility, and compassion. Emma looked down at their joined hands. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. Keanu shook his head with a gentle grin. "Maybe not. But sometimes we're meant to show up for people we've never met. You'll understand that one day." She nodded, tears forming again. But this time, they weren't tears of fear or shame. They were tears of release. As he turned to leave, she whispered, "Thank you." Keanu paused at the doorway, glanced back once, and said, "Just keep singing, Emma. The world still needs to hear your voice." The door closed softly behind him, leaving her standing taller than before. By sunrise, the world had already seen it. The clip of Keanu Reeves kneeling beside a collapsed contestant had spread across every platform imaginable. Headlines filled news feeds. Keanu Reeves rushes to aid fainting contestant on live TV. The moment Hollywood's nicest man proved it again. Kindness in real time. Keanu's act goes viral. Within hours, millions had watched this 30-second video. His calm voice, his steady hands, and the quiet way he shielded Emma from the chaos around her. Viewers across the globe replayed the moment again and again, commenting not on the show itself, but on what one person's instinctive compassion revealed about the human spirit. Comments flooded in from strangers. "He didn't hesitate. That's who he really is." In a world of noise, this was pure silence and care. "He's not acting. That's just Keanu." The internet, for once, seemed united in something good. At the America's Talent Challenge headquarters, however, the reaction was more complicated. Producers sat in a conference room, surrounded by laptops and half-drunk coffee cups, replaying the footage. Some were inspired, others nervous. Ratings were climbing, but the incident had disrupted the planned flow of the season. The showrunner, a sharp-tongued executive named Brian Lasker, tapped his pen against the table. "It's touching, sure," he said, "but we can't just let her come back. It sets a precedent." Across from him sat Maggie Tran, the episode's producer, the one who had hesitated to cut to commercial. Her eyes were tired but thoughtful. "She didn't quit," Maggie said quietly. "She fainted." Brian sighed. The audience already got their emotional payoff. "We move on. That's television." Maggie didn't answer. She just looked down at her screen where the still image of Keanu's hand holding Emma's filled the frame. There was something about that photo, the calm in his face, the dignity in how he helped her up, that made everything else feel shallow. An assistant entered, holding out a phone. "Maggie, it's Keanu Reeves. He's on the line." The room went silent. She hesitated, then took the call. "Mr. Reeves, hi, this is Maggie." On the other end, his voice was calm and warm. "Hi, Maggie. I just wanted to thank your crew for how they handled things last night." "Oh, thank you," she said, glancing around at the others who pretended not to eavesdrop. "It was quite a night. Yeah, Keanu said with a light chuckle. Then his tone grew gentle. Listen, I was thinking about Emma, the young woman who fainted. Is she doing okay? She's stable, Maggie replied. The medic said it was just stress. That's good, he said after a pause. I wanted to ask if she's going to get another chance to perform. Maggie hesitated. That's still being discussed. Some of the higher-ups think it might affect the pacing of the show. Pacing, Keanu repeated, almost amused. You never know what someone carries to the stage, Maggie. Sometimes the hardest performance is just walking up there. Maggie didn't answer at first. She could hear the sincerity in Keanu's tone, not as an actor trying to make a statement, but as a man speaking from genuine understanding. I agree, she said softly. But the network can be rigid. I get that, he replied. But maybe this is the moment they shouldn't be. You saw how scared she was. She deserves a chance to stand on that stage without fear. Sometimes we only grow if someone believes in us long enough to try again. There was something in his calm confidence that made resistance impossible. Maggie found herself nodding, though he couldn't see her. I'll talk to them again, she promised. Thank you, Keanu said. And tell her she didn't fail. When the call ended, the room was quiet. The other producers looked at Maggie expectantly. Brian leaned back in his chair, skeptical. He's a nice guy, sure, but we can't run the show based on sympathy. This isn't sympathy, Maggie said. It's humanity. You saw that clip. How many people do you think tuned in last night because they wanted to see kindness for once? Brian hesitated. Even he couldn't deny the numbers climbing on the monitors around the room. The clip had more engagement than any performance that season. Sponsors were already calling to praise the show's heartwarming authenticity. It wasn't the scandal they feared. It was a miracle of empathy they hadn't expected. Maggie stood, pushing her chair back. Emma gets her second chance, she said firmly. I'll take responsibility. Later that day, an email went out to the entire crew confirming that Emma Carter would return next week to perform again. Some staff members cheered quietly in the hallways. Others questioned the decision, but everyone knew whose voice had tipped the scale. Meanwhile, in a small apartment on the edge of downtown Los Angeles, Emma sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by unopened news notifications. Her little brother, Jake, scrolled through his phone with wide eyes. Em, he said, you're on every news site. Look, Keanu Reeves helped you. She groaned and covered her face with both hands. Please, don't remind me, she mumbled. Jake grinned. He's literally calling you brave. People are saying you're trending as the girl Keanu saved. She peeked through her fingers. I fainted on stage, Jake. That's not brave. That's humiliating. But even as she said it, her phone buzzed with a new message from Maggie Tran. It read simply, "We'd like you to come back and sing again next week." The decision was made with Keanu's encouragement. Emma stared at the message for a long moment, speechless. Then her voice cracked with disbelief. He what? Jake looked up from the couch. Keanu Reeves called them for you? Emma couldn't stop smiling through her tears. I guess he really meant it when he said, I didn't fail. Emma sat quietly at her kitchen table, still holding her phone, as if afraid the message would disappear. The sun streamed through the window, lighting up the small, cluttered space. A coffee mug, sheet music scattered across the table, and a photo of her and Jake with their mother, taken years ago in Kansas before everything changed. She reached for the photo and ran her thumb across her mother's smile. Mom, she whispered, you always said miracles come when you least expect them. Her voice broke as she smiled faintly. I think one just did. Her brother looked at her, concerned but proud. You're really going back? Emma nodded slowly. I have to. Not because of the show. Because someone believed I should. That night, as she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, memories of her life before the stage came flooding back, working 2 jobs at a diner and a grocery store, saving every dollar to keep Jake in school, coming home exhausted but still singing quietly while washing dishes. After their mother passed, Emma promised herself she'd never stop chasing the dream they once shared. But somewhere between the bills, the grief, and the endless struggle, that promise began to fade. The talent show had been her last attempt, a desperate shot at something brighter. And then, in a blink, she thought she'd ruined it forever. Until one stranger's act of kindness reminded her that dreams don't end with a fall. In another part of the city, Keanu sat in his quiet home office. The same photo from the show still open, on his laptop, screened him kneeling beside Emma, their hands touching. He closed the lid and leaned back in thought. He had seen too many people crumble under pressure, too many give up when all they needed was one person to believe in them. Maybe that's why this moment stayed with him. Maybe that's why he had called Maggie. Outside, the city lights flickered like tiny stars against the dark. Somewhere, both of them an unknown singer and a world-famous actor sat in silence, unaware that a single act of compassion had already begun to change both their lives forever. The email from the producers arrived early Monday morning. Emma had barely slept, replaying the nightmare of her collapse over and over in her mind. When her phone buzzed, she almost ignored it, assuming it was another headline or gossip alert. But the subject line caught her eye. Invitation to return to America's Talent Challenge. Her hands shook as she opened it. The message was short, but life-changing. Dear Emma Carter, after discussion and review, we would be honored to have you return for a special performance next week. The decision was made in recognition of your courage and potential. We hope you'll accept this opportunity to continue your journey. With gratitude, Maggie Tran. Executive producer Emma read it 3 times before she finally whispered, "They want me back." Jake, still half asleep at the kitchen table, blinked at her. "You're serious?" She nodded, laughing through tears. "They're giving me another chance." The following hours felt unreal. Reporters called. Fans she'd never met sent messages online, saying they admired her bravery. But the one voice she kept thinking about was Keanu's, the calm reassurance, the warmth in his eyes when he told her she hadn't failed. She knew his words had made this possible. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Keanu's phone buzzed nonstop. Friends, colleagues, and strangers were forwarding him articles praising his compassion. One headline read, "Keanu Reeves proves once again why he's Hollywood's heart." Another said, "He didn't act, he reacted like a hero." Keanu glanced through them briefly, then set the phone down. Fame didn't interest him. What mattered was whether Emma was okay. When his publicist called to suggest issuing a statement, he simply said, "No statement." Anyone would have done the same. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Not everyone would have rushed forward. Not everyone would have cared enough to look past the spectacle and see the person. Still, humility kept him silent. He didn't want to be celebrated for doing what he believed every human should instinctively do. Later that week, while Emma prepared for her return, a courier arrived at the studio, carrying a small envelope addressed in neat handwriting for Emma Carter. The assistant who received it noticed no sender's name, only a single wax seal pressed into the back. When she handed it to Emma later that evening, she said, "Someone wanted you to have this, said it was important." Emma hesitated, turning the envelope over in her hands. It was simple, elegant, and unmistakably personal. Something about it made her heart race before she even opened it. Emma sat alone in the rehearsal lounge, the letter trembling slightly in her hand. She broke the seal carefully, sliding out a folded piece of ivory stationery. The handwriting was unmistakable, steady, neat, yet filled with quiet character. She read the words slowly, her eyes widening with each line. "Emma, Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to try again. You've already shown courage by standing back up. The next step isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about remembering why you started singing in the first place. Keanu. She pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. It wasn't long or elaborate, but somehow the message hit her harder than any speech could have. She read it again and again, until she could recite it by heart. Then, almost instinctively, she reached for a small pushpin and placed the letter above her mirror. The paper fluttered slightly from the air vent, catching the light. Each time she glanced at it, her heartbeat slowed. Over the next few days, rehearsals began. Emma returned to the same studio that had once swallowed her whole. The stage lights still felt too bright, and the empty rows of seats still looked intimidating. But now there was a quiet resolve beneath her fear. The first time she tried singing, again her voice cracked halfway through. Her throat tightened. Her knees felt weak. She stopped, gripping the microphone tightly. The producer watching from the control booth began to rise, but Emma lifted a hand. "No," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I just need a second." She took a long breath, eyes flicking toward the mirror on the side wall where the note was reflected faintly. And then she tried again. This time her voice steadied. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was honest. The raw emotion that came through carried more power than flawless pitch ever could. When she finished, the assistant running the soundboard clapped quietly. "That was it," he said. "That was real." Emma smiled shyly, her chest rising and falling with relief. "I didn't think I could do it," she admitted. He pointed toward the mirror. "Looks like someone knew you could." Each night, she left the studio feeling a little stronger. And every morning, before brushing her hair, she'd read the note again. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to try again. The words became her rhythm, her anchor, the pulse beneath every song she sang. As the week went on, the studio transformed into a quieter, more reverent place. Crew members who had been indifferent before now smiled when Emma walked in. There was something about her presence, humble, fragile, but determined, that reminded them why they'd joined the entertainment business in the first place. She wasn't a celebrity. She wasn't a headline. She was hope with a microphone. Every morning, she'd stop at the mirror where Keanu's letter hung. She'd whisper the words aloud before rehearsal, as though grounding herself in them. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to try again. Each repetition carried new meaning. Some days, it sounded like a mantra. Other days, a prayer. The producers watched from the sidelines, noticing how her confidence returned in tiny steps. She laughed more with the sound crew, stayed later after practice, and even started humming while walking through the hallways. The same girl who had once fainted on stage now moved with quiet purpose. Still, fear wasn't gone. On the third day of rehearsal, she froze mid-song, hands trembling as the weight of the past threatened to crash down again. But instead of running off stage, she closed her eyes and whispered something under her breath. "Breathe." The sound operator dimmed the lights slightly, and Emma began again. Her voice was soft, trembling with emotion, but steady. The room filled with something genuine, something unpolished, yet deeply moving. Maggie, standing at the back of the set, felt tears prick her eyes. She turned to the assistant beside her and said quietly, "This is why we brought her back." Later that evening, after everyone had left, Emma lingered alone under the stage lights. She looked out at the empty rows of seats, remembering the moment she'd fallen. Her heart raced, but she didn't turn away. Instead, she stepped to the center of the stage and whispered, "I'm still here." At that same hour across town, Keanu sat in a small cafe, tucked away from the city noise. He sipped his coffee quietly, while reading a brief email from Maggie, updating him that Emma had accepted the offer and was rehearsing daily. She'd added one last line. "She keeps your note above her mirror." "It's helping," Keanu smiled to himself. "Good," he murmured. That's where courage begins. Outside, the night air was cool and calm. He finished his coffee, left a generous tip for the barista, and walked into the quiet Los Angeles street. Somewhere beyond the hills, a young woman was learning to sing through fear, and that, to him, was enough. The week that began with shame was ending with strength, and neither Emma nor Keanu realized that the performance ahead would change them both forever. The day of Emma's return dawned cool and quiet, the kind of morning that felt like the world was holding its breath. She woke before sunrise, unable to sleep. The air inside her apartment was still, filled with the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of cars passing below. She sat at her kitchen table, her cup of tea untouched, staring at the folded note she had carried everywhere for the past week. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to try again. She read it once more, traced the handwriting with her fingertip, and then carefully slipped it into her pocket. It wasn't just a note anymore. It was armor. By late afternoon, the studio was alive with movement. Bright lights flickered as technicians adjusted cameras. Makeup artists hurried from room to room, and producers called out last-minute orders over headsets. Every corner of the building buzzed with energy. The show's crew was doubled tonight, anticipating a record number of viewers. The story of Emma Carter's fainting incident and her return had turned America's Talent Challenge into a national event. Emma arrived quietly, wearing a soft blue dress that shimmered under the hallway lights. She carried herself differently now. Each step was careful, deliberate, not from fear, but from focus. The same hallway where she had fallen felt smaller somehow, less like a tunnel of judgment and more like a path she was meant to walk again. Backstage, she greeted the sound engineer with a small smile. "Thank you for the levels last time," she said. "I know it must have been chaos." He smiled back. "You ready for tonight?" She paused, thinking about the question. "I'm ready to try," she said finally. In the audience, the lights dimmed to signal the start of the live broadcast. The familiar theme music swelled through the speakers, and the crowd erupted in applause. The host strode across the stage, voice booming with practiced enthusiasm. "Welcome back to America's Talent Challenge. Tonight's episode is special because sometimes the most powerful performances come after a fall." The camera panned across the cheering faces until it stopped on the front row. There, unnoticed by most until now, sat Keanu Reeves. He wore a black suit jacket over a simple gray shirt, blending in as much as possible. But when Emma glanced toward the audience and their eyes met, the noise of the crowd faded from her mind. He gave her a single nod, steady, calm, and full of silent encouragement. It wasn't grand or performative, but it carried the same weight as a standing ovation. Backstage, Maggie Tran stood with her arms folded, trying to mask her nerves. The crew around her whispered, "Will she make it this time?" Someone adjusted the lighting cues nervously. Another whispered into a headset for camera focus. Maggie exhaled slowly. "She's going to be fine," she said, more to herself than anyone else. The host's voice boomed again. "She's back. The girl who captured the nation's heart. Emma Carter." The crowd roared as the lights swept across the stage. Emma waited behind the curtain, clutching the microphone to her chest. Her palms were damp, her throat dry, but her heartbeat was calm. Not steady, never steady, but calm in the way a storm quiets before dawn. She whispered to herself, "You're not here to prove anything. You're here to sing." A stagehand counted down beside her. In 3, 2, 1. The curtain lifted, and she stepped into the light. The audience hushed. 1,000 faces stared back at her, but unlike before, their energy felt different. There was warmth now instead of pressure, curiosity instead of judgment. She could feel it, a collective hope that this time she would stand tall. The host smiled from the side of the stage, introducing her with care. "Last week, this young woman reminded us all what it means to be human. Tonight, she's back, not to redeem herself, but to remind us of courage. Emma took her place at the center of the stage. The spotlight was bright, but it didn't blind her this time. She could see the judges' faces, the shimmer of the audience, and the familiar black blazer in the front row. Keanu sat motionless, his hands clasped, his gaze steady. Their eyes met again. For a heartbeat, the noise of the room vanished. She didn't see cameras or producers, just the man who had told her she hadn't failed. That moment grounded her. The music began softly, the first few piano notes filling the air. It was a simple melody, one she'd chosen herself, stripped of any grand effects. The arrangement was slow, vulnerable, almost like a conversation with herself. She lifted the microphone, her hand trembling slightly. The first note escaped her lips. Fragile, but pure. Then the next one came, steadier, and the next, until her voice began to build like light spilling through clouds. Backstage, Maggie held her breath. A sound engineer whispered, "She's doing it." The room felt sacred. Crew members stopped moving. Even the camera operators slowed their motion, afraid to interrupt something real. The audience leaned forward, drawn not by perfection but by emotion. Every word Emma sang carried the weight of her story: fear, failure, and the quiet decision to rise again. As she reached the first chorus, her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't stop. Instead, she smiled faintly and kept singing. That small imperfection made the performance even more human, and the crowd responded with soft applause mid-song. Keanu's eyes never left her. His expression was unreadable but full of something deeper than admiration, pride perhaps, or recognition. Emma's heart steadied. The trembling left her hands. The fear didn't disappear, it transformed into power. As Emma sang the final verse, the lights dimmed to a golden glow that bathed the stage in warmth. The audience was silent except for her voice, each word resonating through the air with fragile honesty. When the final note faded, there was a pause just long enough for everyone to feel the weight of it. Then the applause came, not as noise, but as a wave of emotion. People stood, clapping and cheering through tears. Emma lowered her microphone, her lips trembling as she smiled. The stage lights reflected in her eyes, like tiny sparks. She took one step back, almost overwhelmed by the sight of people standing for her, not because she was perfect, but because she had tried again. Keanu remained seated for a moment, his head bowed slightly, hands clasped as if in quiet gratitude. Then he rose slowly, joining the standing ovation. Their eyes met once more, and this time, she didn't see pity or encouragement. She saw respect. The host stepped forward, voice thick with emotion. "Emma, Carter, everyone," he said softly. A reminder that courage can sound like a song. The judges didn't rush to speak. Even the toughest among them took a moment before saying, "That wasn't just singing. That was a story." Another judge nodded, eyes glistening. "You didn't just come back. You brought us with you." Backstage, Maggie wiped her eyes discreetly and whispered to a cameraman, "Keep the shot on her face. That's the moment." Emma took one last bow, her heart racing but peaceful. The noise, the lights, the cameras all blurred around her as she whispered under her breath, "Thank you, Keanu." He didn't respond aloud, but his nod was enough. It said everything that words couldn't. The music swelled again, signaling the end of the segment, and as Emma walked off the stage, she carried herself differently. She had fallen once, but this time, she left standing taller than anyone else in the room. And somewhere in the crowd, every person watching at home or in that studio felt a little braver for it. The moment had finally come. The stage was washed in soft blue light, and the audience waited in reverent silence. Emma stood alone beneath the glow, microphone in hand. She could feel the weight of every eye watching her. But this time, it didn't crush her. It steadied her. She took a deep breath and let the sound of the quiet fill her chest. When the first piano chord of Hallelujah began, she closed her eyes. The melody felt like an old friend, familiar, gentle, and full of memory. Her voice came out fragile at first, barely more than a whisper. I heard there was a secret chord. The crowd leaned in, as if afraid even a breath might disturb the moment. The first verse trembled, soft and uncertain. Each word carried the memory of what had happened before the fainting, the humiliation, the fear. But there was something new beneath the trembling now. Courage. As she sang the next line, her voice steadied. It wasn't power she found. It was peace. In the front row, Keanu sat perfectly still. His hands rested in his lap, his expression calm but deeply focused. It was as though he could feel every beat of her heart in the rhythm of the song. Emma reached the second verse, and the emotion began to swell inside her. Her throat tightened, her breath quivered, but she didn't stop. She remembered the note pinned to her mirror. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision to try again. Her eyes opened, glistening under the lights. She looked out into the audience, but didn't see a crowd. She saw every person who had ever doubted themselves, every dreamer who had fallen, every soul who had thought they weren't enough. The third verse flowed through her like water. Her voice deepened, carrying weight and warmth that hadn't been there before. Each word struck the room with quiet power. Love is not a victory march. It's a cold, and it's a broken hallelujah. The truth of it hung heavy in the air. Backstage, Maggie gripped the edge of her clipboard. Her throat tightened as she watched the monitors. "This is different," she whispered. "This isn't just a comeback, it's healing." The sound engineer beside her nodded, his eyes damp. Emma's voice soared, then broke slightly mid-note. The audience didn't flinch. Instead, the silence deepened, reverent and full of empathy. That single imperfection made the performance human, and that humanity made it beautiful. As she reached the instrumental bridge, she lowered her head for a moment, gathering herself. When she looked up again, her eyes found Keanu's. The sight of him, the man who believed in her when she couldn't, brought a calm she couldn't explain. She exhaled slowly and sang again. Emma's voice carried through the studio, like light breaking through clouds. The second verse of Hallelujah began, her tone trembling at first, then strengthening as the words unfolded. She wasn't singing to impress anyone, not the judges, not the cameras, not even the audience. She was singing to heal something inside herself. The crowd grew completely still. Every sound faded except the soft hum of the piano and Emma's voice rising above it. Each note seemed to come from a deeper place, one touched by both pain and hope. She closed her eyes, letting the song take her wherever it needed to go. By the time she reached the middle of the song, emotion overtook her. Her lips quivered, and tears welled in her eyes. But she didn't stop. She remembered Keanu's words. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to try again. She held onto that line like a lifeline, steadying her breath, her tone softening, but never breaking. The audience leaned forward, entranced. They weren't just listening, they were feeling. People who had come for entertainment now found themselves holding back tears. In the front row, Keanu's gaze never wavered. His hands were clasped together in front of him, his expression serene but his eyes glistening. As the bridge began, the camera cut to him. The world saw it, his quiet tears shining under the lights, not of sadness, but of understanding. He had seen courage before, but this was something pure, something almost spiritual. Backstage, Maggie whispered, "She's doing it," her voice barely above her breath. Crew members nodded silently, eyes fixed on the monitor. No one moved. No one wanted to break the spell that had filled the studio. Emma's voice swelled as she reached the final chorus. Each repetition of Hallelujah grew more powerful than the last, but never loud. It wasn't about volume, it was about truth. Each word carried a lifetime of struggle, loss, and forgiveness. Her knees trembled slightly near the end, but she steadied herself. She took one long breath and sang the final line, not perfectly, but with every ounce of her soul. The sound floated through the room and dissolved into silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Not a clap, not a whisper. Just the quiet reverence of something holy. Then, slowly, the audience rose to their feet, applause swelling into thunder. Emma bowed deeply, tears slipping down her cheeks. Her whole body trembled, but this time, not from fear from release. The applause went on and on long after the music stopped. It rolled through the studio in waves, as if no one wanted the moment to end. The judges stood with the rest of the crowd, clapping not for spectacle, but for something rare sincerity. The camera zoomed in on Emma's face, glowing beneath the soft lights. Her eyes shimmered with tears, her lips trembling into a small, radiant smile. She lowered her microphone slowly, taking in the sight before her. Rows upon rows of people on their feet, some wiping their eyes, others standing in silent awe. It was as if the entire room shared one collective heartbeat. Then the camera shifted to the front row, and the world saw Keanu Reeves rise to his feet. His eyes glistened with emotion, his expression open and unguarded. He clapped slowly at first, then firmly, the sound echoing through the hall. The crowd followed his lead, turning applause into something deeper, a tribute to courage, to grace, to the power of standing back up. Emma met his gaze. For a moment, everything else disappeared again. The crowd, the cameras, the stage lights. All that remained was a quiet understanding between two souls who had crossed paths at the right time. Her lips moved silently, shaping the words, "Thank you." Keanu nodded once, his face calm and kind, as if to say, "You did this on your own." The host stepped back onto the stage, his voice catching slightly as he spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, Emma Carter. That wasn't a performance. That was a prayer." The audience cheered again, louder this time, breaking the emotional silence with joyful energy. But for Emma, the noise seemed distant. She stood still for a few seconds longer, breathing deeply, her heart full. She knew she would never forget this night, not because she had won anything, but because she had reclaimed herself. Backstage, Maggie wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. The crew exchanged looks of disbelief. One of them whispered, "I've worked on this show for 10 years. I've never seen a room go that quiet." As Emma walked off stage, the standing ovation still echoing behind her, she felt light, almost weightless. Her hands no longer trembled. She reached the curtain, turned for one last look at the glowing stage, and whispered softly to herself, "Hallelujah." Keanu watched her disappear behind the curtain, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Then he looked down at his hands, the applause fading around him, and let out a slow, steady breath. He knew what everyone else would soon realize, what the headlines would capture and the world would remember. That sometimes, the most powerful moments on television aren't scripted. They're born from grace, from faith, and from one person deciding to rise again. The episode aired on a Thursday night. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, the internet ignited like a wildfire. The official network upload of Emma Carter's return performance, paired with the earlier clip of Keanu rushing to her aid, was shared millions of times before midnight. Comments poured in from every corner of the world, flooding timelines and feeds with words that felt more like confessions than reactions. People didn't just watch the video. They felt it. One post on social media read, "This isn't about fame or TV, it's about remembering that kindness still exists." Another person wrote, "Keanu doesn't need to act in movies. He is the movie." By dawn, hashtags like #Hallelujah Moment, #Be Like Keanu, and #Emma Carter Returns were trending globally. The clip of Keanu kneeling beside Emma was replayed on every major network. Commentators couldn't stop talking about the quiet humanity of the moment. The way he'd blocked the cameras from closing in, the way he'd spoken softly to her, the way he'd looked at her, as though she were the only person in the world who mattered. Morning news anchors tried to stay composed, but failed. On Good Morning America, a host paused mid-segment, her voice cracking. "We see so much conflict, so much division," she said, her eyes glistening. And then something like this happens, a reminder that compassion can change everything. Even the late-night shows, usually filled with sarcasm, shifted tone. One host replayed the moment of Keanu's gentle words, "We shouldn't judge anyone based on a moment of fear," and said quietly, "If that's not wisdom, I don't know what is." The studio audience applauded, not out of amusement, but respect. Clips of Emma's Hallelujah performance went viral in their own right. Musicians, vocal coaches, and everyday listeners shared it, calling it one of the most emotional live performances they'd ever seen. Some wrote about how it reminded them of moments when they, too, had almost given up. Others said they watched it with their children as a lesson about grace and resilience. Emma herself could hardly process what was happening. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages, interview requests, and notifications. She scrolled through thousands of comments, her eyes widening at the words of strangers. "You gave me hope tonight. I cried watching you sing. I've been afraid to try again after failing once. You helped me remember that it's not too late." At one point, she saw a short post that stopped her cold. It was from a young girl who wrote, "I was going to quit my school's talent show because I'm scared of fainting. But after seeing you, I'm going to try again. Thank you, Emma." Emma pressed her hand to her heart and whispered, "That's what it was for." Across the city, Keanu sat quietly in his kitchen, sipping coffee as his phone lit up beside him. Hundreds of unread messages. Friends, journalists, producers, all wanting quotes, reactions, or interviews. He ignored them all. He didn't need to say anything. The message was already out there. By Friday morning, the world had turned what happened on that stage into something far bigger than a show. News outlets called it the moment that stopped America. Online forums overflowed with conversations about kindness, fear, and courage. People weren't talking about celebrities anymore. They were talking about being human. Clips of Keanu's calm expression, the way he reached out to Emma, and the way he told the crowd, "We shouldn't judge anyone based on a moment of fear," played on loop. Every time the words echoed, someone, somewhere felt seen. Parents began showing the video to their children as an example of compassion. Teachers replayed it during class discussions about empathy. Churches used Emma's Hallelujah performance during Sunday services. Even hospitals began sharing it with patients recovering from panic attacks or trauma, reminding them that breaking down didn't mean breaking apart. And in every version of the clip, one detail never failed to move people. The image of Keanu kneeling on the stage floor, head bowed slightly, as if praying for calm in a world that had forgotten how to care. On social media, a veteran wrote, "That man didn't just help a singer. He reminded all of us that the strongest thing you can do is stay when everyone else freezes." A nurse commented, "The way he kneeled down, like she was the only person in the room, it's what this world needs." Even Hollywood responded. Actors who had worked with Keanu posted about him, sharing memories of similar quiet acts of kindness. A coffee delivered to a tired crew member, a handwritten note to an extra, a call to someone who'd lost a loved one. One director tweeted, "He doesn't do good things to be noticed. He does them because that's who he is." Emma's life changed overnight. Talk shows called. Record labels sent inquiries. A major publication offered her a feature titled, "The Girl Who Fell and Rose Again." But in the middle of it all, Emma stayed grounded. She released one short message on her social media account. It read, "I fell. I stood up, but I didn't do it alone." Thank you for reminding me that kindness can lift more than applause ever will." That post alone was shared nearly 1 million times in a single day. Keanu read her message that evening, while sitting in his backyard, the city lights twinkling below. He smiled quietly, folded his phone shut, and looked up at the sky. It wasn't pride. He felt it was peace. Somewhere between that stage and this moment, a simple truth had spread farther than anyone expected. That one act of decency could travel farther than fame ever could. By the weekend, even the most cynical corners of the internet had gone quiet. For once, people weren't arguing. They were reflecting. And as one late-night host summarized perfectly, "In a world full of noise, one man chose silence and empathy, and somehow that spoke louder than anything else." 4 days after the broadcast, the studio felt different. The air was calmer now, lighter somehow, as if the place itself had absorbed the energy of everything that had happened. The cameras were being tested for another taping. Stagehands moved about casually, and Emma Carter stood center stage again, this time rehearsing a duet with another contestant. Her voice carried softly across the empty rows. The music wasn't for competition now, it was practice, gentle and unhurried. She laughed between takes, something she hadn't done in weeks. The crew, many of whom had been present during her collapse, smiled as they watched her sing. It felt like watching someone come back to life. Then, quietly and without fanfare, a familiar figure entered the room. Keanu Reeves walked through the backstage door wearing his usual dark blazer and jeans. No cameras, no entourage, just him. He nodded politely to a few crew members, who looked up in surprise. Maggie, noticing him from the control booth, blinked in disbelief. "Is that?" She started, then smiled. "Of course it is." Emma was mid-verse when she saw him. Her voice faltered slightly, her eyes widening. "You came back," she said, half breathless, the music fading behind her. Keanu smiled faintly, hands tucked in his pockets. "I promised to hear the full song," he said. The musicians exchanged quiet glances as Emma stepped down from the stage. Her heart was pounding, but not with fear this time. She walked toward him, her expression a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "I thought you'd be halfway around the world by now," she said. He shrugged with an easy smile. "I had some time. Thought I'd see how you're doing." They stood for a moment, both unsure who should speak next. The silence wasn't awkward, though it was warm, filled with mutual respect. Emma finally broke it. "I don't know how to thank you," she said softly. "You didn't just help me up that night. You changed everything that came after." Keanu's smile softened. "You changed your own life," he replied. "I just reminded you it was worth it." She blinked back tears, nodding slowly. The truth in his words hit her harder than she expected. All this time, she'd been giving him credit for something she'd done herself standing back up. Maggie, watching from a distance, signaled to a photographer nearby. "Get this," she whispered, "but do it quietly." Emma and Keanu moved to a small corner of the stage where they could talk privately, away from the lights. Crew members passed by occasionally, pretending not to stare, pretending it was just another rehearsal day. But everyone knew this was something different, a moment that felt almost sacred in its simplicity. Emma and Keanu sat on the edge of the stage, their feet dangling over the side. The faint sound of a piano echoed in the background as the other contestants packed up for the day. For a while, neither of them spoke. There was no need to. The air between them carried an easy quiet, like two people who didn't have to fill silence to feel understood. Finally, Emma broke it. "After everything that's happened, it still doesn't feel real," she said softly. "The messages, the news, the people calling me brave, it's overwhelming." Keanu tilted his head, listening. "It's a lot to take in," he agreed, "but you earned every bit of it." She shook her head lightly. "I don't know if I did. I didn't plan any of this. I just survived something embarrassing in front of millions of people. "That's exactly why it matters," he said gently. "You showed the world what it means to be human. People saw themselves in you. They saw the part of themselves that wants to give up but doesn't." She looked down at her hands, twisting the edge of her microphone cord. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," he replied. "It's just true." She smiled, faintly, her shoulders relaxing. "When I fainted that night, I thought my life was over. But now, it feels like something new began instead. It's strange how one fall can change everything." Keanu nodded slowly. "Sometimes the fall isn't the end of the story. Sometimes it's the thing that wakes us up." The words lingered between them. Emma blinked, her eyes glistening again. "You really have a way of saying things that make people believe again," she said with a soft laugh. "I think that's your real talent." Keanu smiled modestly. "I just try to pay attention. Most people don't need saving. They just need someone to see them." At that, Emma looked up and met his eyes. "You saw me?" she said simply. He didn't answer right away. He just gave a small nod, the kind that said everything without words. A few moments later, Maggie approached from behind the camera area, hesitant to interrupt. "We're wrapping up for the evening," she said quietly. "But before you both go, would you mind if our photographer took one photo just to remember today?" Emma glanced at Keanu, unsure. He looked at her with that same calm expression and said, "If you want to." She nodded. "I'd like that." They stood side by side near the footlights, both of them relaxed, but visibly emotional. The photographer adjusted the lens, capturing the moment. In a single frame, Keanu's hand lightly resting on Emma's shoulder, her head turned toward him with a grateful smile. The background was blurred, but the emotion was crystal clear. It was a simple image, no stage lights, no makeup, no crowd. Just two people, one who had fallen and one who had reminded her how to stand again. When the shutter clicked, the sound echoed softly through the room. Emma turned to him once more. "Thank you for coming back," she said. "I wouldn't have missed it," he replied. "Besides, I needed to hear the rest of your song." They both laughed, quietly. As Keanu began to walk toward the exit, Emma called after him. "Hey Keanu," she said. "You were right." He turned slightly. "About what?" She smiled. "Bravery really is deciding to try again." He smiled back, gave her one last nod, and disappeared down the hallway. By nightfall, the photo would be everywhere. And once again, the world would pause not for fame or drama, but for the simple image of kindness finding its way home. By Monday morning, the conversation had shifted. The headlines no longer focused on the performance alone, they now centered on the man behind it. Every outlet wanted to know, why was Keanu Reeves at the show in the first place? Speculation spread fast. Some assumed he had been promoting a new film or preparing for a surprise television project. But when journalists started digging, they discovered something entirely different. Keanu hadn't gone there for publicity. He'd come as a favor to a young producer friend named Ryan. Cole, a former film student he'd mentored years ago. Ryan had recently joined the show's technical crew, and Keanu had promised to stop by one evening to see his work. There had been no press release, no announcement, just a quiet visit to support a friend. A production assistant, who'd seen him that night, told a reporter he didn't even sit in the VIP section. He asked for a regular seat so he wouldn't distract the contestants. He just wanted to watch the show. Another source added, he doesn't like publicity. He just likes people. That simple statement caught fire online. It was quoted, reposted, and transformed into a kind of modern proverb. Screens filled with images of Keanu kneeling on stage, walking through the studio quietly, smiling beside Emma after the reunion. Underneath each image, people wrote the same phrase. He just likes people. Articles soon resurfaced, recounting stories from throughout his life. There was the time he gave up his subway seat for a woman carrying heavy bags. The time he bought breakfast for the entire film crew of The Matrix Resurrections, without anyone asking. The time he stopped to help a stranded driver on the side of the highway, the internet rediscovered every quiet act of kindness he had ever done and realized they all shared the same pattern. He never stayed long enough to take credit. News anchors replayed the backstage photo of Keanu hugging Emma and called it the picture of decency. One columnist wrote, "He reminds us that goodness doesn't need a microphone." Another said, "In an age where cameras are always rolling, his most powerful moments are still the ones that weren't meant to be filmed." Keanu didn't respond to any of it. While the world analyzed him, he went back to his normal life, riding his motorcycle through the hills outside Los Angeles, eating at small diners, and spending quiet evenings reading scripts in his modest home. To him, nothing about what happened felt extraordinary. It was just instinct. But for Emma, the ripple of his kindness was still unfolding. She had started writing again, songs inspired not by fame, but by truth. Each lyric felt like a step toward healing, a way of putting everything she'd lived through into words. One line kept repeating in her notebook. "He caught me before I fell twice." Emma's apartment had become her sanctuary again. The walls that once felt small now carried sound, her voice, her laughter, and the soft hum of her guitar. She sat near the window, sunlight spilling across her notebook, its pages filled with lines and fragments of lyrics she'd been writing for days. Her newest song had no title yet, but one line, written and underlined 3 times, had become the anchor for everything she wanted to say. "He caught me before I fell twice." Those words weren't just about the night she fainted. They were about everything that followed: the faith, the encouragement, and the reminder that kindness could lift a life higher than applause ever could. Each verse she wrote carried pieces of her story. The first verse described fear, the trembling before a fall. The second spoke of quiet hands that steadied her when the world blurred. The chorus was a whisper of gratitude, a melody meant not for fame but for remembrance. When Maggie stopped by one afternoon to check on her, Emma played a rough draft of the song. Maggie listened silently, her hand pressed over her heart. When it ended, she said softly, "That's not a song. That's a thank you letter." Emma smiled. "That's exactly what I wanted it to be." Meanwhile, news outlets continued to talk about Keanu, but the tone was different now. The story had evolved from a viral headline into something much larger, a reflection on human decency. Writers called it a cultural pause, a rare moment when fame didn't overshadow sincerity. People who had never cared about celebrity news before found themselves watching the video, not to see a star, but to feel something real. One article read, "He didn't rescue her for the cameras. He acted because that's who he is." What makes the moment remarkable is not the man himself, but what he awakened in us. The world began calling him the quiet constant. Keanu heard about the nickname when Ryan texted him one morning, attaching a news link with a laughing emoji. "You're trending again, man. The quiet constant. Sounds like a superhero name." Keanu replied simply, "The world already has enough heroes. We just need better people." He put his phone away and returned to sanding a part of a motorcycle frame in his garage, lost in the rhythm of ordinary work. He didn't think much about the cameras or headlines anymore. He was just glad Emma was singing again. A few weeks later, Maggie sent him a demo of Emma's new song. It was unpolished, recorded on her phone, but the raw emotion in her voice stopped him cold. When she sang the line, "He caught me before I fell twice," he smiled faintly, set the phone down, and closed his eyes. It wasn't about him. It never had been. It was about what kindness could do when no one expected it. How one small act could echo in someone else's song forever. And somewhere in Los Angeles, while Emma rehearsed those words for the first time in a real studio, Keanu rode his motorcycle down the Pacific Coast Highway, wind in his hair, peace in his chest, unaware that the song she wrote about him would soon travel just as far as the moment that inspired it. The calls began almost immediately after Emma's song clip spread online. Talk shows, magazines, radio hosts, and streaming platforms all wanted one thing: a joint interview with Emma Carter and Keanu Reeves. Producers from Good Morning America reached out first, followed by The Tonight Show, The View, and several podcasts that claim to focus on inspirational moments. The offers grew larger every day. Some offered money, others promised exclusives. Publicists sent messages to Keanu's management begging for a joint appearance. But the answer was always the same. Keanu declined every request. When his assistant asked if he wanted to make any public comment at all, Keanu shook his head. "This story isn't about me," he said simply. "It's hers." Instead, he suggested that if Emma wanted to speak, she should do it alone. "People need to hear from the person who stood back up," he told Maggie. "That's the part that matters." Maggie passed along his words to Emma, who sat quietly in her small apartment as she read the message. The thought of appearing on television again filled her with anxiety. "What if I freeze?" she asked Maggie over the phone. "You won't," Maggie said gently. "You've already lived through the hardest part. Now you just get to tell the truth." After a long pause, Emma agreed. "All right," she said softly. "I'll do it. But I want it to mean something." The morning of the interview, New York City buzzed with anticipation. The Good Morning America studio was packed with viewers holding signs that read, "We love you, Emma, and be brave like Keanu." Even the hosts looked genuinely excited as they prepped behind the cameras. When Emma arrived, she wore a modest beige dress and minimal makeup. She looked nervous but calm, holding a silver pendant that once belonged to her mother. As she waited backstage, she thought about Keanu's words. "It's your story." When her name was announced, she stepped onto the stage to polite applause. The host greeted her warmly and gestured for her to sit. "Emma Carter, welcome," he said. "You've captured the heart of the nation these past few weeks. How are you feeling?" Emma smiled faintly, folding her hands in her lap. "Grateful," she said. "Overwhelmed, but grateful." The host nodded. "Millions of people have watched what happened that night and everything since. What's one thing you'd want them to understand about that moment?" Emma took a deep breath. Her voice trembled slightly, but she didn't hesitate. "He didn't just save me on stage," she said softly. "He saved me from giving up." The room went silent. Even the host seemed at a loss for words. He leaned forward slightly, moved. "That's powerful," he said. "Do you mean he inspired you to keep singing?" She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes, but more than that, he reminded me that kindness still exists, and that we all have the power to give it." The interview lasted less than 10 minutes, but by the time Emma walked out of the studio, the world had already changed again. Clips of her words, "He didn't just save me on stage. He saved me from giving up," spread like lightning across social media. News outlets picked up the quote within the hour. By evening, it had been replayed millions of times. The interview struck a nerve. It wasn't flashy or dramatic, but it felt real. Viewers described it as the most genuine moment they'd seen on television in years. One journalist wrote, "She didn't talk like a celebrity. She talked like someone who'd found hope again." Within 24 hours, the hashtag number #BeLikeKeanu started trending. It began as a simple way for fans to share their admiration, but soon it grew into something much bigger, a movement. People from around the world began posting small acts of kindness inspired by the story. A teenager in Chicago shared a photo of himself walking his elderly neighbor's dog, with the caption, "Because Keanu would." A nurse in Dallas wrote, "I stayed late tonight to comfort a patient who couldn't sleep. Number be like Keanu." A mechanic in Ohio posted, "Fixed a single mom's car for free. Thought of that guy who helped a stranger up on stage." The posts multiplied, spreading far beyond the entertainment world. They filled feeds with good news. For once, stories of people helping each other, forgiving each other, and showing patience instead of judgment. It wasn't about idolizing a man. It was about emulating a moment. Keanu noticed it a few days later when a friend texted him screenshots of the hashtag. He scrolled through them quietly, reading the stories. Some made him smile, some made him pause. When Ryan, his producer friend, asked if he planned to comment, Keanu said, "No, let them own it. It's theirs now." Emma, meanwhile, found herself flooded with interview requests again. But this time, she accepted only one, a local radio segment where she played her new song live for the first time. The host introduced her with a smile. "We all know your story, Emma," he said. "But tonight, we want to hear your heart." Her voice filled the studio with soft emotion. When she reached the line, "He caught me before I fell twice," listeners across the country fell silent. The station's phone lines lit up afterward, people calling in just to say thank you. That night, Emma posted a single photo of her and Keanu from their reunion, captioned simply, "He taught me that one small act of kindness can echo forever." It became the most shared image of the week. Newspapers around the world covered the movement. The Guardian called it the Keanu effect. Time magazine ran a headline that read, "A kindness revolution sparked by silence." And a late-night host summed it up perfectly. For once, the internet isn't canceling someone. It's celebrating what it means to care. Stayed quiet, turning down every new request for interviews. When a reporter finally caught up with him outside a coffee shop and asked what he thought of the movement, he smiled politely and said, "It's not about me. It's about what we're all capable of when we stop looking away." That single sentence aired on national television that night, and millions of viewers nodded in agreement. For once, the world wasn't divided by anger or noise. It was united by a simple idea that kindness, when given freely, could still move the world. It was a quiet Wednesday evening when Emma's phone rang. She had just finished dinner and was tidying up her kitchen when the unknown number appeared on her screen. Normally, she would have ignored it, but something made her answer. "Hello, is this Emma Carter?" A polished voice asked on the other end. "My name is Diane Whitmore. I'm an executive from Redwood Records in Nashville." Emma froze. She'd heard of the label, one of the biggest in the industry, home to some of her musical heroes. "Yes, this is Emma," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "We've been following your story," Diane continued warmly. "Your performance on America's Talent Challenge touched millions, and your original song, 'He Caught Me Before I Fell Twice,' has gone viral. We'd like to discuss the possibility of signing you." Emma nearly dropped her phone. You want to sign me?" she stammered. Diane chuckled. "Yes. You have a voice people believe in, Emma. Not just for music, for something deeper. We want to help you share it with the world." For a moment, Emma couldn't speak. All she could think about was the girl who had once fainted under the same lights that now seemed to lead her somewhere new. "I don't even know what to say," she whispered. "Say yes," Diane said gently. "We'll take care of everything." Emma hesitated. Her heart raced, but her thoughts drifted back to Keanu, too. The calm way he had deflected attention, the humility in how he helped her without seeking credit. Finally, she said, "Can I think about it overnight?" "Of course," Diane replied. "Call me in the morning." After hanging up, Emma sat in silence, staring at the city lights outside her window. Jake, her brother, peeked into the room. "What's wrong? You look like you saw a ghost." She laughed shakily. "I think I just got offered a record deal." His eyes widened. "That's amazing. You did it, Em." She smiled, but her expression softened. "Maybe, but I don't want to rush it. I want to make sure it means something." Later that night, she lay awake thinking about how far she'd come from collapsing on stage to finding her voice again. And now, the same story that almost broke her was about to open a door she never thought possible. She closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness. What would he do? The next morning, the city was still waking up when Emma called Diane back. Her voice was steady now, calm in a way that surprised even her. "I've thought about your offer," she said. "I'd love to sign with Redwood Records, but I have one condition." Diane sounded intrigued. "All right, I'm listening." "I want part of my first contract payment to go to charity," Emma said firmly. "Specifically, to a fund for young artists who can't afford lessons or instruments. And I'd like it to stay that way with every album, every show." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Diane spoke, her tone soft but impressed. "That's unusual, Emma. No one's ever asked that on their first deal." Emma smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's time someone did." Diane laughed quietly. "May I ask why?" "Because that's what he'd do," Emma said simply. The executive didn't need her to say who he was. The world already knew. By noon, the deal was official. News outlets soon reported. Viral contestant Emma Carter signs. Major record deal, donates portion to charity. The story spread almost as fast as her song had. People applauded her generosity, noting how it mirrored the same quiet kindness that had inspired it. Meanwhile, across Los Angeles, Keanu was in his garage, tightening the chain on his motorcycle when his phone buzzed. Ryan had sent him the headline. Underneath it, he'd written, "She learned from the best, man." Keanu chuckled and shook his head. "She didn't learn it from me," he murmured. "She already had it in her." Later that week, Ryan mentioned that America's Talent Challenge was planning something special for the finale. "They're calling it Everyday Courage," he said. "A tribute to contestants who've overcome something real stories, not just showbiz drama." Keanu listened quietly. "That's a good idea. They even said they're dedicating a segment to you and Emma," Ryan added. "Want me to tell them you'll be there?" Keanu shook his head. "No, let it belong to them." What he didn't say, and what no one outside a few people would ever know, was that he had already found his own way to be part of it. Through Maggie, the show's producer, he learned of two contestants who had quietly dropped out earlier in the season because they couldn't afford to stay in Los Angeles for filming. Both were young, talented, and trying to support families back home. Keanu asked for their names, then transferred funds to cover not only their travel and living expenses, but also a full year of tuition for each of them at the performing arts school of their choice. He did it anonymously, of course. Maggie asked if he wanted the network to acknowledge it, but he just smiled. "The point of a good deed," he said, "is that no one needs to know." When the season finale aired 2 weeks later, the audience had no idea who had made it possible, but the energy in the room felt different. It was warmer, more sincere. The host spoke about quiet generosity and the unseen hands that keep others standing. Somewhere out there, Keanu was watching from home, a mug of coffee in hand, smiling faintly as the words filled the screen. Backstage, Emma performed her new song for the finale crowd. Her voice was stronger than ever, her heart steady. Before walking on, she whispered a promise to herself. "I'll keep paying it forward." As the final note faded and the audience rose to its feet, Emma glanced at the camera and smiled. It wasn't for fame, or even for the fans. It was for the man who'd taught her that courage could be quiet, and kindness could echo far beyond a single stage. That night, 2 anonymous scholarships were processed. One message accompanied the donation. For those who still believe, kindness is its own kind of art. The night of the America's Talent Challenge grand finale arrived like a storm of lights, music, and anticipation. The theater was packed to the rafters, the air electric with energy. This was the night when the nation would celebrate its new talents. But for millions watching at home, it was also something more, a chance to see the story that had captured their hearts come full circle. Backstage, Emma stood before a mirror in a soft silver gown. Her hair was loosely curled, her expression calm but glowing. In her hand, she held the same small silver pendant she had worn during her first comeback performance. Maggie peeked into the dressing room. "They're almost ready for you," she said. Emma smiled, her reflection softening. "I'm ready." As she walked toward the stage entrance, she spotted Keanu standing quietly in the wings. He wore a dark suit, his usual understated style, hands folded loosely in front of him. He wasn't part of the program officially. He was only there as a guest. But his presence alone seemed to steady the atmosphere. Their eyes met, and he gave her that familiar, quiet nod. No words, just that small gesture of faith that had once pulled her back from despair. She smiled in return and whispered, "Thank you for everything." The host's voice boomed across the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back a voice that inspired millions. Performing her original song, Rise Again, Emma Carter." The lights dimmed, and a soft piano began to play. Emma stepped onto the stage, her gown shimmering under the golden spotlight. The audience rose in applause before she even sang a note. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, feeling the warmth of it all, then took a breath and began to sing. Her voice was richer, now confident, soulful, and filled with gratitude. The lyrics told a story of falling and rising, of losing faith and finding it again, in the kindness of others. Each note felt like a heartbeat, each word like a truth she had earned through pain and perseverance. In the shadows, Keanu watched quietly, the faint glow of the stage lights reflected in his eyes as he listened. He wasn't smiling exactly, but there was something serene in his expression, a deep peace that came from knowing the moment didn't belong to him, but to her. When Emma reached the bridge of the song, her voice rose to a trembling peak. "You reminded me the light remains, even after the fall." The crowd fell silent, every person caught in the emotion of it. Backstage, Maggie felt tears spill down her cheeks. The camera crew around her didn't speak. They just kept rolling, aware they were capturing something rare. As Emma sang the final line, "So I will rise again," she held the note until the room vibrated with it. When it faded, there was a heartbeat of silence before the audience erupted. The applause was thunderous, shaking the walls, the cheers rising like a wave that refused to stop. And in that moment, Keanu knew she had completed her journey. As the applause thundered on, Emma stood at the center of the stage, her chest rising and falling with emotion. The lights shimmered around her like soft halos, and she pressed a hand to her heart. Overwhelmed, the host stepped forward, smiling through tears of his own. "Emma Carter, everyone," he said into the microphone. "A performance that reminds us all what courage truly sounds like." The cheering continued, echoing through the hall. But then, just as the noise began to fade, the host turned toward the wings. "And tonight," he said with a mischievous smile, "we have one more special guest, someone who helped make this incredible journey possible." Emma blinked, confused, her head turning toward the side of the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," the host said, voice swelling with excitement, "please welcome Keanu Reeves." For a split second, the room froze. Then the audience exploded into cheers so loud that the cameras shook. The chant began almost instantly. "Keanu! Keanu! Keanu!" rolling through the studio like a wave of gratitude. Backstage, Keanu hesitated. He hadn't expected this. His instinct was to stay back, to keep the attention on Emma. But the chants grew louder, the crowd refusing to stop. Maggie gave him a gentle nod, her eyes glistening. "Go," she mouthed. He stepped forward slowly, emerging into the light. The audience rose to their feet again, clapping and cheering as he crossed the stage with that calm, humble stride that had become his signature. He reached Emma, who was still standing there in disbelief, tears gathering in her eyes. She handed him her microphone, her voice breaking slightly as she spoke. "You reminded me," she said softly, "that compassion is louder than applause." The audience went silent. For a moment, even the cameras seemed to pause. Keanu smiled gently, shaking his head. "No," he said, his voice quiet but carrying easily through the hall. "You reminded all of us." The audience erupted once more, but this time it wasn't just for the performance, it was for the message. People were wiping their eyes, holding their loved ones' hands, feeling the rare unity that came from witnessing something truly good. Emma turned toward the crowd, her expression radiant through tears. "I wouldn't be standing here without him," she said, gesturing toward Keanu. "He showed me that kindness doesn't need an audience, it just needs a heart." The camera zoomed in on them, her tearful smile, his calm gaze, their shared quiet. It wasn't glamour, it was grace. As the credits rolled that night, millions of viewers at home watched the image that would soon go viral again. Keanu and Emma, standing side by side beneath the golden lights, surrounded by applause that felt endless. For a fleeting moment, the noise of the world faded, and what remained was something rare: humility, hope, and the reminder that compassion, when given freely, could bring a crowd of strangers to their feet. The studio had gone quiet after the finale. The laughter, applause, and chatter had faded into the hum of empty hallways. Crew members packed up lights and cables while the echoes of celebration drifted into the distance. Keanu slipped away from the crowd, searching for a quiet corner. He found one near the back of the stage, a dim hallway lined with equipment cases and half-coiled cables. He sat down on one of the flight cases, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The adrenaline from the night was fading, replaced by a calm exhaustion. He ran a hand through his hair and exhaled deeply, letting the quiet settle. It had been an emotional evening. He hadn't planned to walk out on stage, hadn't expected to be part of the finale at all. But seeing Emma there, standing so tall and sure, had moved him more than he cared to admit. It reminded him of why he'd helped her that night. In the first place, not because of cameras or fame, but because he'd seen something in her eyes that he recognized in himself once. Fear that needed kindness more than words. Footsteps echoed down the hall. He looked up to see Emma approaching, still in her silver gown, holding a small white box tied with a ribbon. Her makeup had mostly faded, and her eyes were red from crying, but her smile was soft and genuine. "I thought you'd left," she said, walking closer. He smiled faintly. "I was about to." "Good thing I caught you first," she said, stopping a few feet away. "I wanted to give you something." He raised an eyebrow, curious. "You didn't have to." "I know," she replied, setting the box on his knee. "But I wanted to." Keanu untied the ribbon slowly, his rough hands careful with the delicate wrapping. Inside, resting on a small piece of cloth, was a simple handmade bracelet made of braided leather and silver thread. Engraved on the small metal plate at the center was one word: breathe. He looked up at her, surprised. "You made this?" She nodded. "I figured. You gave me those words when I needed them most. Maybe you should have them too." He smiled, the kind of small, real smile that carried gratitude. "So I don't forget my own advice?" She laughed softly. "Exactly." He slipped the bracelet onto his wrist and looked down at it, turning it in the light. The engraving caught a faint shimmer, simple yet grounding. "It's perfect," he said quietly. "Thank you." Emma sat beside him, on the edge of the flight case. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was peaceful, like the kind of silence shared between people who understood each other without needing words. Emma leaned back against the wall, her dress brushing softly against the metal case. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to exhale. The chaos outside felt far away now. No lights, no cameras, just two people who had shared a moment the world would never fully understand. After a few seconds, she spoke again. "You know, I used to think courage meant standing tall in front of everyone," she said quietly. "But I learned it's actually about standing back up when no one's watching." Keanu nodded, his gaze fixed on the bracelet now glinting on his wrist. "That's the kind that lasts," he said. "The quiet kind." She turned to look at him. "Does it ever feel heavy, being the person people look to for goodness? Everyone talks about you like you're a saint, but you're just," she paused, searching for the right words, "human." He gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "It's strange," he admitted. "People see what they need to see. I just try to do the right thing when it's in front of me. Some days, I get it wrong too." Emma tilted her head. "That's hard to believe." He smiled gently. "Trust me, it's true." He rested, his elbows on his knees, thinking for a moment. The world feels dark sometimes, but it's not the darkness that defines us, it's who we choose to be in it. Her voice softened. "Yeah," she whispered. "Then someone kneels beside you." Keanu's eyes met hers, steady and kind. That's where the light begins. The words hung between them, simple, but full of meaning. Neither spoke after that for a while. The hallway hummed faintly with the sound of distant equipment cooling, a quiet backdrop to a moment that neither of them would forget. Finally, Emma stood. "You know," she said, smiling faintly, "when I fainted that night, I thought it was the worst thing that could happen to me. Turns out, it was the best. I wouldn't change a thing." Keanu looked up at her, eyes warm. "You turned it into something beautiful. Most people don't do that." "I think I just followed your lead," she said playfully. He chuckled. "No, you found your own path. I just pointed to the light." Emma nodded slowly, emotion tightening her throat. She looked at him one more time, memorizing the calm in his eyes. "Thank you for everything. Not just for that night, but for believing in me when no one else did." Keanu rose to his feet, tall and composed. "You didn't need me to believe," he said. "You just needed a reminder that you could." He extended his hand, and she took it. They stood there, holding the handshake for a moment longer than necessary. A silent exchange of gratitude that words couldn't capture. When they finally let go, Emma stepped back, smiling through tears. "I hope you know this bracelet isn't just for tonight. It's for every time you forget that kindness still matters." He looked down at it again, then back at her. "I won't forget," he said quietly, "and neither will the world." Emma turned to leave, her footsteps soft against the floor. Keanu watched her go until she disappeared around the corner. Then he looked once more at the bracelet, the single word shining under the flicker of a fading stage light. "Breathe." He smiled to himself, took a slow, steady breath, and walked out into the night. Weeks passed, but the story refused to fade. What began as a viral clip had become something far greater, an echo of kindness that continued to move through the world in quiet waves. The video of Emma fainting, Keanu rushing to her side, and her triumphant return performance was now more than entertainment. It had become a cultural touchstone. Teachers played it during school assemblies to talk about courage and compassion. Counselors used it in therapy groups to help people discuss fear, failure, and recovery. Pastors mentioned it in sermons about humility and grace. Even late-night hosts, who normally traded in cynicism, replayed snippets of the moment and spoke with uncharacteristic sincerity. "It's not about fame," one said. "It's about what we choose to do when no one expects us to care." At a high school in Ohio, a guidance counselor showed the clip to a group of nervous students preparing for their first talent show. When the video ended, one shy girl raised her hand and said, "If she could get back up after fainting on national TV, maybe I can walk on stage without shaking." The room broke into soft applause. Letters began to arrive at the studio by the thousands. But this time, they weren't addressed to Keanu Reeves. They were for Emma Carter. They came from all over the country. Handwritten notes, typed letters, even postcards. People thanked her not for being perfect, but for being real. One came from a veteran in Florida. I haven't left my house in years because of anxiety. Watching you stand back up reminded me that I still can. Another came from a single mother in Seattle. I tell my daughter your story every night before bed. You showed her that being scared doesn't mean being weak. Emma read every letter she could. Sometimes she cried. Sometimes she smiled through the tears. They're not writing to me, she told Maggie one afternoon. They're writing to the version of themselves they still believe in. Maggie nodded. You gave people permission to fall and still be worthy of applause. Meanwhile, Keanu stayed out of the headlines. The world still talked about him, but he remained silent, content to let the noise fade around him. On movie sets and charity events, he moved as he always did, quietly, unassuming, with that same calm that seemed to anchor everyone near him. Those who worked with him began to notice something new, though. Every so often, he would leave behind small, handwritten notes for people he met, a lighting technician, a makeup artist, a young intern. They were never long, never signed with his name. Each note said something slightly different, but they all carried a similar message. Bravery is choosing to try again. People kept them tucked in their wallets, pinned to mirrors, or taped above desks. None of them made it to the internet because everyone who received one understood instinctively that they weren't meant for fame. They were meant for remembrance. The ripple continued to grow, quiet, yet unstoppable. Emma's story began appearing in places she never imagined: school newsletters, therapy centers, church bulletins, and workplace workshops. Teachers shared it to inspire students before exams. Therapists used it to help patients struggling with panic and fear. A university professor even designed a seminar titled "Falling Forward: The Psychology of Resilience," using Emma's clip as the opening case study. Everywhere the message was the same. Failure didn't have to define you. Kindness could. Emma received an invitation to speak at a youth mental health summit in Chicago. She almost declined public speaking, still made her nervous. But then she remembered the bracelet she'd given Keanu and the word etched into it: breathe. She accepted. When she stepped onto the stage weeks later, she told a crowd of teenagers, "I used to be afraid of falling. Now I'm afraid of never trying again." The entire room rose to their feet. Her inbox overflowed with more messages, many from people who had watched the video years ago, but only now found the courage to write. One read, "I finally auditioned for my school choir today. I fainted halfway through, but I stood back up and finished. I think that's what you would have done." Meanwhile, Keanu kept to his quiet rhythm. Between filming schedules and charity events, he stayed mostly out of public view. But the people who worked near him noticed subtle changes. On the set of his next film, he began leaving those handwritten notes again, tucked inside coffee cups, left on dressing tables, slipped under call sheets. Each carried that same simple message: bravery is choosing to try again. Crew members passed them around like lucky charms. A lighting technician pinned one to his jacket. A costume designer taped hers above her sewing table. A young actor who had been battling stage fright folded his into his wallet. None of them talked about it publicly, but they all felt the quiet power in the gesture. One day, when a production assistant thanked him directly for the note, Keanu smiled and said, "It's not mine anymore. Pass it along." And people did. The phrase began showing up in unexpected places: on sticky notes in office cubicles, on chalkboards in classrooms, on bathroom mirrors in college dorms. Someone even had it printed on a small bracelet identical to Emma's. It became a silent movement, passed from hand to hand without names or credit. When Emma heard about it, she sent Keanu a text. "Your words are traveling farther than you think." He replied a few minutes later, "Good. That's where they belong." Months later, a journalist tried to sum up the phenomenon. His article ended with a simple line: "It began with a fainting girl and a man who knelt beside her." But what grew from it wasn't a story about them. It was a story about all of us. By then, both Keanu and Emma had moved on quietly with their lives. But in classrooms, hospitals, and homes around the world, their story kept playing, not as a spectacle, but as a reminder that a single act of compassion could outlast applause, outshine fame, and echo endlessly in the hearts of those who chose to try again. It was a warm Sunday afternoon when Emma found herself standing in front of a small crowd gathered at a local community center in Los Angeles. The event wasn't televised. There were no flashing cameras or producers giving cues, just families sitting on folding chairs, children running between picnic tables, and the faint scent of fresh lemonade drifting through the open doors. She wore jeans, a white blouse, and her favorite brown boots. No stage makeup, no microphone, only her guitar, resting gently against her shoulder. The sunlight filtered through the old stained glass windows behind her, scattering soft colors across the walls. The room quieted as she strummed the first few chords. Her voice rose, calm and steady, carrying through the open air. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Each note felt grounded, like coming home after a long journey. The song she chose wasn't one of her new recordings. It was Rise Again, the same song she had sung at the finale, now stripped down to its simplest form. The lyrics hit differently here. They weren't for an audience of millions or a panel of judges. They were for neighbors, friends, and strangers who had come together just to listen. As she sang, people began to hum along softly. By the second chorus, a few voices joined her. By the bridge, the entire room was singing. Emma looked around, smiling through the music. These were ordinary people, teachers, bus drivers, single parents, teenagers. Yet in that moment, they sounded like a choir. The same crowd that might have gasped once when she fell was now lifting their voices with hers, celebrating not her fame, but her resilience. And in the back of the hall, half hidden behind a pillar, Keanu stood quietly. He didn't wear his usual suit or leather jacket, just a plain black shirt and jeans. His hands were tucked into his pockets, and a faint, content smile rested on his face as he listened. No one noticed him, and that was exactly how he wanted it. He wasn't there for recognition or applause. He was there because he had promised himself he would always show up when it mattered, even if it was just to witness someone standing strong. Emma finished the final verse with her eyes closed, her voice barely above a whisper. When the last note faded, there was no thunderous applause, just a peaceful silence. Then the crowd began to clap softly at first, then louder, until the room filled with warmth. She looked toward the back instinctively, as if sensing him. For a second, their eyes met. He smiled and gave her a slow nod before stepping out into the sunlight. Outside, the afternoon light spilled across the parking lot, soft and golden. Keanu walked slowly toward his pound motorcycle parked by the curb. The sound of applause still drifted faintly from inside, blending with the laughter of children playing near the fence. He paused for a moment, glancing back at the building. Through the open door, he could see Emma setting down her guitar, hugging one of the local volunteers. She was glowing, not like a celebrity, but like someone at peace. He smiled faintly and whispered under his breath, "You did it." Then he put on his helmet, the small bracelet on his wrist, catching the light, its engraved words still clear as ever. Breathe. Inside, Emma stepped off the stage and joined the crowd. People shook her hand, thanking her not just for the music, but for what her story had meant to them. One woman, older and trembling slightly, took Emma's hand and said, "I was there that night you taught me. It's never too late to start over." Emma squeezed her hand, her eyes warm. "We all fall," she said softly. "The miracle is that we get back up." A group of children ran past, giggling, their parents calling after them. Emma laughed, watching them go, and for a fleeting moment, she saw herself at their age dreaming big, afraid of failing, but still willing to try. She looked down at her hands, the same hands that once shook before holding a microphone, now steady and strong. Later, when the event ended, the volunteers began folding chairs and sweeping the floors. Emma walked back to the front of the empty room, looking at the spot where she had just sung. Sunlight still streamed through the stained glass, painting the stage in soft gold and rose. She sat down on the edge, letting the silence fill her. She thought of that first night, the bright lights, the panic, the fall, and how everything she'd feared had somehow led her here. What she once saw as her greatest failure had become her greatest teacher. And she thought of Keanu, the man who had knelt beside her when everyone else froze, the man who reminded her and the world that kindness doesn't need to be loud to change a life. She smiled, whispering to herself, "Some heroes don't wear costumes." The memory of his calm voice echoed in her mind, steady and clear. That's where the light begins. As the music from another performer drifted in from outside, Emma closed her eyes and took a slow breath, the kind that reaches the soul. Beyond the hall, Keanu's motorcycle engine started, the low hum fading into the distance. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The story had already gone farther than either of them could see. And for everyone who had watched it unfold on television, on their phones, in classrooms, or across the internet, it had become something more than a story. It was a reminder that compassion can outshine applause, that courage can rise from fear, and that the smallest act of kindness can ripple farther than fame ever could. The screen fades slowly to black. Then, in simple white letters, the reflection appears. Some heroes don't wear costumes. They just show up when others fall. The music swells softly, an instrumental reprise of Rise Again. And as the video closes, the voiceover offers one final thought for the viewers at home. Have you ever been lifted by a stranger's kindness when you thought you'd failed? Share your story in the comments and tell us what you'd do if you saw someone fall.